We are live. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Atomics Founder Hacks podcast. We've had a couple of weeks off for a summer break, and we're really delighted to be back to share what we've seen, something we've read, and something we've learned that's been supportive to us or the founders that we're working with across a range of different businesses. Let me start by saying a quick hello to the delightful Anthony Enright.
Good morning.
And the delectable Mr. Alex Moore.
Good morning.
Good morning, both. So I think this week, Anthony is going to kick us off, Anthony, with something you're seeing in the businesses you're working with right now. So
yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben. We're sort of coming out of that summer period, aren't we? Some people are still off, but I always found September an interesting month because people sort of in the run up to Christmas, summer holidays are done, children are going back to school, but obviously this is different now. And people are still facing different challenges. Every business I'm working with is facing a different challenge. But one of those that I think some people saw coming and some didn't is the challenge over government makes a decision during the summer to say, please go back to the office, please travel back to the office where you can. And all of a sudden, organisations are now in that situation where do they go back to the office? Don't they go back to the office? Lots of businesses have been working successfully virtually for the last 6 months. And what I'm finding in talking to the founders and senior executives within these businesses is that everybody's got a slightly different view on what they want to do. At the moment, I think it's still driven by, do I want to get on a train? Do I want to get on a tube, tram, bus, etc., to commute into the office, given where we are still with the virus? But actually, the bigger question is, once that clears and people feel safer to travel, is that there's people within organisations that just say, no, it's worked really well virtually. I don't see any need to go back to travelling. And you've got other people within the business that are turning around saying, no, as soon as I can get back to the office, I want to be back in the office for a whole host of different reasons. So there's a huge challenge coming up for owners and founders of businesses to say, how do you plug that gap? What are you going to do where you've got, X amount of staff that are saying, I want to go back to the office, and X amount that are not wanting to go back to the office. So huge challenge, and just wondered your thoughts on that. Ben, what were your thoughts?
I really get it, actually. I mean, it's something I'm seeing across the piece, although I guess the first thing that comes up to me is we're talking exclusively here about people who have the luxury of choice. Of working in an office. There are plenty, in fact the majority of jobs out there, right? You don't have that choice if you're a teacher or a nurse or a doctor or a delivery person, or so there is a certain sort of lens through that we're looking at it through, which I think is fair enough. And I guess that's almost a sort of a challenge as well, if there are people in that space of going, perhaps too extreme on their opinion either way. You kind of go, well, do you know what? You're very lucky to have that choice, and maybe we could reflect on it from that position of privilege, that you are the type of worker in that industry where you have that opportunity. So that does come up, but then equally I really hear you on the leadership challenge of it, because at one level we want to accommodate inclusivity, we want to accommodate diversity in our organizations, and is not that working preference perhaps a part of that? So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I'm sure Alex Moore will tell us what the answer is now.
Give us the answer, Alex.
You are a horrible man. I mean, there is no answer. I don't know. Maybe we'll end up with a slightly better world where there'll be a little bit more flexibility. I watched a very interesting documentary on Apple TV about gaming and Atari. And in the 80s, they were the first business to really let all the barriers down of working in an office. People could turn up at whatever time they like. They could wear shorts. And they were right at the forefront in Silicon Valley, when most of Silicon Valley used to be prune farms. And it just makes me think, fast forward to the day now, and I think it's the businesses, the race to attract talent and retain talent seems to be letting people be themselves. So as a founder of a business, do you need to? If you're in the luxury, like you stated, Ben, if you have the option, is the answer just, guys, you can do what you like? And, there was a big phobia, I think, pre-COVID about, oh, yes, you're working from home today, oh, yeah, really. And I think people do trust people to work from home. If there's something that has changed from COVID, people do trust people to work from home and be productive now, maybe more than they did in March when this thing kicked off. So I don't know, maybe the answer is, as a founder, if you can be, let your people decide if they want to come into work, and if not, if they don't want to, that's fine. And there's a lot more trust to doing so. What do you think, Mr. Enright?
You raise a really good point, because one of the companies in question, when I first started working with them in about October last year, there was an issue of attracting staff, because they really didn't let anybody work from home. So it was 5 days a week into the office. And thankfully, through various discussions, they started to look at what the options were. And thank goodness they did, because otherwise they'd have been in real trouble. And actually, they transitioned to virtual really well in like most businesses, in a very short period of time. But now, we've got an instance this week where somebody needed to go to the office to do something, and they were asked to go, and they refused to go. And again, at the moment, you look at that and go, well, if you're concerned about traveling, where you're maybe at home with somebody who's vulnerable, you go, okay, I kind of get that. But there will become a point where you say, no, you've got to go into the office. And if that person says no, what are you then going to do?
It's a power dynamic, isn't it?
It's a huge power dynamic.
Yeah. I was probably, there was a time I was, one of those people who was a bit skeptical about working from home. And I'll admit, it did used to annoy me when I had staff saying, can I work from home constantly? Because it so quickly turned from I guess in my head at least, there was a time I thought of it as kind of a privilege that became a right. And so the conversation went from, oh, is it okay if I work from home, to I'm working at home today. And that, I found that very, very triggering. I'd like to think now I'm trying to let that go, in terms of, maybe I had some mess in my head around, as an employee, you have to control people. And maybe there's a letting go we will have to do around that. I don't know. And I've definitely found, as I've just sort of let that go and went, no, I respect your right to make some choices, as long as you deliver me the performance, and my focus is more on the performance than the behaviour, than that's the thing.
And I agree, Ben, and I think it's, outcomes and deliverables, but for somebody like me, I want to be out and I want to be seeing people, and others want to be at home. So it's a really tricky challenge. So we will monitor that one closely. So as we move on to Red, it's over to Mr. Moore.
Yeah. So this week my Red is a fantastic article I came across in the FT about the trials and tribulations of a German company called Wirecard, who you may have heard of. It's caught up in a massive amount of fraud, missing billions. The story reads like some novel. Actors in the Philippines pretending to be bank employees, missing accounts. McKinsey's role in this whole thing, which was encouraging them to try and buy Deutsche Bank. I mean, it's a bonkers story. And I think, we read it because the three of us are involved in a fintech called TipJar, and it just shows what can happen, on a scale when there is no corporate governance. And I just thought it was an excellent sort of story because it was so compelling, but it was also, a lot of people's lives were really affected by this. I think one guy ended up dead. It's pretty scary stuff. It's a great article. We will share it at the end of this. And I guess it's the question out to you guys is, how does a business end up in this state? And a book I read, which made a profound influence on me a few years ago, it's called How to Measure Your Life. And in it, the author, I can't remember his name now, he states that the path to a ruin of a business when it does something fraudulent is, it's just that the initial step off the road. And his point of view is never take a step off the road as a founder, because you take one step and it leads to another step, and shortly you cannot get back on the road, and you are dead. He uses the example of Enron, what happened to Enron. So I think this is very, very interesting and a cautionary tale, and I shared it with everyone inside Tip Jar because it really struck a chord with me. But yeah, what do you guys think about the road to ruin and governance and all those things that that are very important, but sometimes get neglected, especially in the early days of a business? Who wants to answer first?
I love that quote about don't take one step off the path, because it may only be a slight deviation, but if you continue along that path, it's a huge deviation. And my experience of it is that it's not always down to the founder and the moral set of the founder or the value set of the founder. My experience has been where you maybe hire in, where you haven't always got that organic growth, and you hire somebody in who isn't part of that value set. And I've shared the story with you both in the past as to how damaging that can be to a business, where you see a gap, you plug it, you think the person's ideal, they come with a huge referenceability and credibility, but actually they don't share the values of the business. And then all they need, in my experience, all they need is somebody to align with them within the organization who also maybe should have been asked to leave before them because they also don't share the values. And as soon as they find somebody to align with, they can be incredibly powerful. So you may have a business of 20 people, and you've got 18 who share the values, and you've got 2 that have aligned and don't. And I've seen the damage that can do, and the moral line in which, because actually they align, and this phrase, they make each other bad, right? And you can see it with kids as well, right? And you're talking about friends, who are your friends to your children? You can either make each other good or make each other bad. And so I've seen the damage that can have. So as founders, I think it's always that, I think it's different if you're questioning your own moral health, but actually you've got to view the moral health of the people that you're hiring and continually monitoring that. And as soon as you see that somebody is looking to step off the road, you have to react. Now that comes from experience. I've learned the hard way. But Ben, what were your views on that?
Yeah, as Alex says, working with Tip Jar is clearly this was a cautionary tale, and I completely agree. It's the not one foot off the road. I'd probably take it one step further as well, because perhaps slightly to challenge some of what you've shared there, guys, that I actually do think it's about the founder and the leadership in every instance. I think it's very easy to blame those people who step off the road. They do so in the cultural context of that organisation. And actually, what I found when I read this story, I actually tried to read it empathetically. And I would probably lay money that those first steps off the road were caused by a sense of desperation, a sense of a desire to please, a sense of a desire to meet an expectation that was set by the board of that company. And they can deny it all they want to, but that is the consequence of, often when you see these things, it's a consequence of driving an organisation too hard and putting so much pressure on people that what they end up letting go of is their moral compass. Now, you could say there's an amount of greed in there at an individual or personal level, but often when you look at these situations, and I mean, I don't know the detail of Wirecard, but frequently when you look at those fraudulent situations, people are not doing these things cackling and going, ha ha, I'm evil, aren't I clever, and twirling a moustache, Often they're going, often they're doing it because they're going, I need to do this to feed my family. If I don't do this, I'm going to lose my job. If I don't do this, I won't deliver the results that my boss expects. So I think we always have to look at it in those two dimensions and be very thoughtful as leaders of organisations that do have a fiscal or fiduciary responsibility, much like Tip Jar, that that corporate governance is only one side of it. Corporate governance is the stuff you write down and the rules people follow. Almost every fraud that's ever happened is because people don't follow the rules that are written down. And you have to then go, why? and some of the work I used to do with the big banks in one of my former lives, some of this was around that behaviour. When we look at fraud, and when we look at people breaking rules, which is often what is happening here, The problem is not that we didn't have the rules written down. The problem was that we had a culture that put so much pressure on people that they ended up thinking that breaking rules was okay. So it's a bit of a challenge and a different take on it. But, I think it's a profoundly cultural issue as well. I don't know. Is that an okay contribution, Mr. Moore?
He's always better. He's always better at analysing stuff than I am. Articulating it. No, I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, the culture, the culture of a business, is very, very important, and I guess that does come from the founder. And it's the wanting to be compliant and the pressures and the levers you pull that creates the culture and drives people to, cut corners. So yeah. So there you have it. Right. Well, that leads us nicely to this week's Learned, I believe, which is over to you, Ben.
Yeah. So this was one I've shared it with you guys, and I guess I can't really say exactly what it was that just brought this back to mind, but it's something I've reflected on for many years, working with entrepreneurs, working with founders, being one myself. It's a competency that I've become aware of, that I see some founders have, some don't have so much. But I guess the label I'd put on it, without being too dramatic, is, can you stare into the abyss without fear? Which I know sounds very dramatic, but I actually think it's truth. I think there is something I've seen many founders able to do, where they actually stare into a future and it is utterly unknown. It is a void, and somehow they stare into that and keep moving forwards without fear. And I think it's interesting because I think for many years, in my business career, if you can call it a career, it's more of an adventure. There've been moments where I'm involved in something and I go, do you know what, if this doesn't work, my family are destitute. But it's over for us. We're done. Maybe I've moved a little bit beyond that now, but actually, I never felt frightened by it. I always felt able to go, no, it's okay. We will find a way. There's always a move. There's always a way that we will deal with this. And at the end of the day, maybe because I didn't grow up in a very sort of wealthy way. There's a part of me that is always like, well, I know what's in the gutter because I've been there and it's okay. I think I shared the story with you guys that, as long as we can have a £5 bottle of Prosecco, on a Friday night,
easily pleased.
Yeah, my life is fine.
Pleased.
Maybe there's a connection there. I don't know. But I do notice I see other entrepreneurs who almost drive themselves insane by this worry and this stress and this panic about loss. And I sort of see that somehow being quite paralysing for some, almost unable to function because they're so worried. And there's something there in a competence that I've seen in some founders, where actually they can stare into the abyss without fear. I submit it to you as a little learn. Is that an important thing for us to foster, Mr. Moore?
Yeah, I love this. When we have our little editorial briefing and we each throw something onto the table, and I love this one. And I think, staring into the abyss without fear, it is something that, as a founder, you have to. I'm reminded of a meeting I had with my wife and with a bunch of people who are interested in buying a business we were connected to. And she started off the line. They were like, oh, with it's big, we buy this business and we have, they were just trying to wow us with how important they were and their access to capital and how much money they've made over the years. And she just said to them, I've never been more proud of my wife. I don't think I've ever shared this story. And she said, I'm not afraid of being poor. And she just shut them up. And it was really cool. And I think, that whole thing about fear, and I think fear can be, Wayne Rooney talks about, and with football, he likes to use anger. And he uses the anger. He's always a bit angry when he plays. And he says when he plays best, he's a bit angry. I think fear to me has always been a driver for me. I have been fear. I do look in the abyss. There is no safety net there. I can look at it and it kind of makes me go, oh, but I use that fear to make sure I can't fail, and it pushes me, and I like to be pushed. And I think some of the successes I've had in life was that fear of failure and not being able to fear. And that's the thing that pushed me forward. So yeah, that was my thought. Anthony, what's your thoughts on this subject?
Really interesting one for me because, like you, Alex, I think fear has driven me. Fear has driven me to the next step and the next step and the next step. But I also look at it and go, has it stopped making certain decisions? And you get to a certain point, and actually, if you drop the fear, and I've had it recently with a couple of scenarios, and actually, if you're able to drop the fear, there's something honest that comes out of it for me. There's an honesty that comes out of dropping the fear. Because if you're fear of losing a client, or you're fear of upsetting somebody, or you're fearful of the consequences of, it's the right action, but you're fearful of the consequence of it, it can lead you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do, and are not the right outcome for you. So I see it a lot with sports people. You mentioned Wayne Rooney, and you know me, I follow rugby, and there's a lot of international rugby players that have said fear has driven them, but as they've progressed and matured through their careers, they've looked to drop the fear. They don't need the fear anymore. It's other drivers, and they've seen a real spike in their performance once they've dropped that fear. But there's always that concern of, would they have got there without the fear, and what it looks like without it. So I think it's a fascinating subject, and somebody far more educated than me would probably give us the psychological and view on it. But just hearing you guys talk, I'm constantly thinking about decisions. Certainly for business owners and founders at the moment, it's a huge amount of fear out there. And I have to say, Ben, when you started talking about it, I see that in you. I see that in the decisions you make. That you don't have that fear. You don't have that fear, and to me, it does lead to an honesty.
I try to do it. I think there have been times where I have been fearful, and it's really interesting what you say as fear as a driver. I guess I've often tried to think in terms of, what am I moving towards rather than what am I running away from, and doing that with a sort of open-minded curiosity rather than a terror. And I think it's where I've been in situations where I've realised that it is fear that's driving me. I guess that's always been a strong motivator for me to change something, or try and change something if I can. But thank you, gentlemen. That was a very interesting conversation. I'm sure we could continue, as we always can, but we are at time. So how do we sum that up? What a wonderful conversation, guys. I mean, how do we accommodate those diverse views and opinions about coming back to the office amongst our teams and lead through that challenge? Maybe it's about reappraising our flexibility. How do we stay on the path when things are really tough, and make sure we don't put that first foot wrong, and maintain that moral compass all the way through our company? And can we foster that ability to stare into the abyss, drop the fear, maybe, as we grow as human beings? Very wonderful.
So would you say fear and flexibility?
Fear and flexibility. Let's call it that. Listen, thank you everybody for listening. We're delighted to be back after our little break. So it remains for me to say a huge thank you to Mr. Anthony Enright.
Thank you, Ben.
And a huge thank you to Mr. Alex Moore.
Thanks, guys, and thanks for listening.
Absolutely. And don't forget, we love to see your comments. So do let us know if anything's been an inspiration for you. Drop us a note at hello@atomics.co.uk. And also, love for you guys to give us some reviews and some feedback on iTunes if you've been enjoying our podcasts. That's it for us for now. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Ben Thomas. We're Atomics, and this has been Founder Hacks. Thanks very much indeed for listening.